Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. After a 6-week summer break, we're now back for season 2, and we're very glad you found us again. We thank all of our television partners in St. Louis on KDNL, KRCG in Jefferson City, KBSI in Cape Girardeau, and KTVO in Northeast Missouri. We'll get right into it. We've got 6 weeks to take in politics, and we're here with a full half-hour panel, starting with Joe Lakin, the head of all things at Victory Enterprises, and now that John Lampe's retired, the best hair in Missouri politics. We're very glad to have you back. Jeff Mazur, the absolute funniest Twitter account. If you don't follow Jeff Mazur on Twitter, it is your bad, and I hate it for you. Now you'll be thrown off by the Peter Kinder avatar that he has, but it is the best one. Steve Tilley, former Speaker of the House, now the governmental relations guru with clients all over the state, and Sarah Martin with Gateway Governmental Solutions. Very glad to have you here with us, and we'll get started with you. The governor's race. The Republicans have, what, a half a dozen now?
I believe so.
Chris Koster seems to be floating his own boat along unimpinged. Who is the person you think Chris Koster matches up best against?
As far as who he has the best chance of
Absolutely.
I would probably say Catherine Hanaway. I think she's damaged at this point.
It will be kind of, some people think it'll be hard for her to level attacks after some of the events that have happened earlier this year. Other folks think she is a woman, so maybe there is a contrast there that pits well against the Attorney General. You sure it's her? I mean, is there anybody else?
I would say as far as people, you're going to need somebody with name recognition. I don't know how much she has, but she has as much as some of the, like if you're not talking Peter Kinder, John Brunner, I don't think, he might have some left over, but I don't think he's going to have a ton. She got an early start. She's certainly tough. I don't think that she would have a problem suffering the attacks or lobbying the attacks, but I do think that, I don't think the women thing will matter, and I do think that Koster would be able to take her on.
Steve, you've actually wandered into the statewide race stuff before. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think it's a tale of two stories. I think on the Democratic side, the party's united behind Chris Koster. Very bright guy, smart guy, hard worker. Great candidate. On the Republican side, it's a free-for-all, so to speak. I agree with Sarah. I think that our weakest opponent is probably Catherine Hanaway because of the Schweik scenario and then some votes on guns and stadium funding. I think our best two candidates are probably Peter Kinder or John Brunner. I think Peter's got great name ID, very, very conservative. I think certainly the favorite in the Republican primary. And John Brunner is kind of intriguing because he doesn't have a voting record. He's got decent name ID from his Senate run. Got good connections because he's been around the state before. I think it's going to boil down to one of those is going to be our nominee facing Chris.
Now, Joe Lakin, we're very excited to have you on the panel today, not just for the hair, but you're with Victory, and Victory has a dog in this hunt. But probably the most talked about person with the most buzz in political circles is Eric Greitens. Tell us about him. Why does he match up best?
Yeah, I think Eric is a great candidate for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously his biography is something that, you look at our candidates in Missouri in the past, he's probably got elements of all of the best biographies all into one. He's a new face, he's exciting. I've been out with him, in Jefferson City, out in Springfield, out in a lot of places, and there's just a ton of excitement for him. So, I think he is our best matchup. I think he's able to undercut the law enforcement message that Koster has used successfully in his Attorney General races. Obviously a Navy SEAL, has a huge fundraising base. So I think he's our most dynamic candidate, and I think he's our best candidate to win.
Jeff Mazur, obviously, I don't know if we can construe your Peter Kinder avatar on Twitter as an endorsement.
Well, listen, I think it's very important that we not complicate this too much. The most valuable tool I think we have for determining who's going to win a statewide Republican primary is the Todd Akin test. Who's the candidate that's most like Todd Akin? And I think Peter Kinder, in this case, certainly is. And you may think that's a joke, but I think it's not, and here's why. I think Mr. Greitens and Mr. Brunner both have tremendous biographies, both have great profile to run in this race. Neither one of them has demonstrated that they have the kind of concrete conservative credentials that I think GOP primary voters require. And I think you have Peter Kinder, who on the other hand has spent his career going to insane lengths at times to try to back conservative causes. And so I think at the end of the day, you have every reason to believe that this is Peter Kinder's race to lose, and that he may well be, that he's certainly the strongest GOP primary candidate.
Sarah, do you think that's the case? Looking from the other side of the fence, do you think it is Peter Kinder's race to lose?
I do. He has a name ID. He has won many statewide. I do.
So Steve, in the fall, if you do have a Kinder-Koster matchup, the Republicans probably will. This looks like they may have a good year in Missouri. How good a year do they need to have to be confident to win that race?
Well, I mean, I think it's a unique dynamic in Missouri because the Republicans overwhelmingly control the legislature. But in St. Louis City and County and Jackson County and the city of Kansas City, we lose by such large margins that we lose statewide. That's why the Democrats control all the statewide elected offices with the exception of Peter. And Peter's been the only one that has been able to break through. And I think because he does well in rural areas, but he also outperforms in areas where Republicans haven't done well. I think we need to have a good year to win, and I think it's certainly a Peter Kinder, Chris Koster matchup. I think will be a close race within 4 points either way.
I think it's interesting. I think that Catherine Hanaway has done a modern political feat that we'll talk about after this race is over in a long time, whatever happens, to move on past earlier this year. I mean, I think that's an impressive thing to keep going. Joe Lakin, we'll change topics, but we are interested to have you back on to talk about the similarities in a Kinder-Koster matchup, and some of those things will be very interesting to talk about as time moves forward. Right to work, one of the most talked about issue in the state before the legislature. Veto session won't be as active as it has been in the past, but the one thing people talk about is this. You know the legislature as well as anybody. Are there the votes in the House to override the governor's veto and put this regulation into law?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question I get asked the most. Having come out of the House and worked a number of veto sessions, a lot of them alongside Steve. And I will say, obviously, the vote came up well short of what's needed for an override in the House. Also came up short in the Senate. I think it's hard to envision a path on right to work, but I will say, and Steve, I think, has experienced this. I can point to a number of issues where at 9 a.m. the day of veto session, we were 20 or 15 or 10 votes short on an issue. And by 10 o'clock that night when we got to it, we had the votes to override. So, I've told people this week, I think, look for the Capitol to be like Arrowhead Stadium on veto session day. And, we'll see if sort of a rallying effect happens around the issue.
Or Busch Stadium.
Or Busch Stadium, maybe. Or Wrigley, obviously.
I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. Steve Tilley, you count the votes for labor. Are there enough Republicans willing to walk back on their vote and override the governor?
I don't believe so, because I think it's a fundamental issue that I think the 24 or so Republicans that stood with organized labor fundamentally believe that it's an overreach of government to get involved in a contract negotiation between two private entities. I think there's 24 or so Republicans that are opposed to a freeloader system that right-to-work states clearly create, where people get the benefit of organization but don't have to pay for the representation. So I think it's a fundamental issue, and I don't think you're going to see that many Republicans back up on a fundamental belief that they have. I think Joe is absolutely correct. I think you can't take anything for granted. I've been all over the state to visit with these individuals in their district, and I think that on the morning of veto session, I don't think anyone will know for certain where we're at, but I feel comfortable with where we're at. I think that labor members and all over the state and in these individual districts have reached out to these representatives and said thanks for standing with us, and I think they'll continue to stand with us.
Jeff Mazur, you're one of the people who probably has actually read this law. When I did, there's a part in there that's somebody's guilty of a Class A misdemeanor, so I would assume it would have been a union head. I own a business. We work with Dave Cook on joining the union. If I run my business like I want to now, under the new regulation the Republicans are wanting to pass, it's not Dave Cook or the union head that goes to jail, it's me. Right. So one of the parts I don't understand that's not talked about is Republicans are wanting to put business owners in jail for running their businesses, and I think that's part of this that gets glossed over.
Sure, I don't think anybody thinks it's a good idea to criminalize a business owner deciding themselves how they want to deal with their employees or with representatives of their employees. So I think there's a reason why a lot of people are wary of that language in the law. But I think even more fundamentally, the votes aren't going to be there, and I think it's because Republicans, by and large, realize that there's some real negative political consequences to them passing this law and putting it into law. I think there are at least 10 or 12 Republicans in Democratic or close districts that are propped up by labor solely because of their opposition to right to work. And the instant that issue disappears off the table, so too does the reason for labor to support those guys. And all of a sudden, you may have the issue disappear and 10 Republican House members disappear as well after the 2016 elections. So I think there's some hesitance to move forward in passing this thing into law and moving that issue off the table.
So working in Democratic politics is a little challenging sometimes. You see a Republican that says, well, less government, except for this one time. And there's a bunch of except for this one times.
Right. Right to work is not just that one time, and it is. But I think you do see the Republicans that feel that way too, who will probably stay with their vote against right to work. So I think that I'm not the only person, or the Democrats aren't the only person that see that.
You know, it seems like there's a political dichotomy that during the Obama presidency, it's just been almost impossible for Democrats to win legislative seats. And going past into the 2018 cycle, the 2020 cycle, is this vote, if a person in St. Charles County or Jefferson County votes for right to work, is this an issue that starts to come back to haunt them post-Obama?
I do, and I definitely think in somewhere like St. Charles County, I also think it's not just because of the Obama administration. I also think redistricting has a lot to do with that. But I think that people feel the pressure, these members feel the pressure of their constituencies, and that matters a lot.
Joe, you've been an architect of a lot of these legislative victories. When you look at that map and you look at the places where you've clearly overperformed and done well, do you start to, when you think about a world where Obama's not president, you think about a world with a different map maybe, does these votes start to matter more and could be a difference in some of these races?
Yeah, you know, I actually don't know that they do make a difference. You know, again, I've worked almost a decade on House races, and I can remember working with Steve. We used to look at the map, and you know, there was a band of Democrats really just north of I-70 all the way across the state that are gone. Largely a result of, I think, President Obama's overreach. And you know, I think whether you look at a crowded Republican primary for governor, or you look at some of these issues, I think the excitement on the Republican side is that I think more and more in each and every day that Hillary Clinton continues to slide, I think we're not looking at, you know, a revival in Missouri for Missouri Democrats. I think, in fact, it's going to be a continuation, if not worse, when she's the nominee at 16, if she is the nominee at this point.
We'll get to that a little bit later on the presidential race, but do you believe that it goes back to Tom Dempsey? The state lost Tom Dempsey since the time we've been on hiatus. He was one of the last people that served in the minority. He kind of knew what it was like to fight some of these tougher races in a different environment. Do you think losing that thing makes some of these more, you know, whether it's Sharia law or getting rid of federal gun laws, things like that, or right to work, do you think it makes these legislators think about these votes a little bit more because there may be a different political implication?
I think ultimately people make a calculation about what's going to fly at home with their voters. Things change in the Capitol, leadership changes. At the end of the day, people are ultimately held accountable by the folks in Jefferson County or St. Charles County or Butler County, wherever they've come from. And so, you know, while it may be very important to all of us as insiders, so to speak, about who's in charge in the Capitol and what issues they're pushing or where they stand on things, ultimately that stuff matters really only in Jefferson City. You go back home and you have to face the voters there. And if people care about issue X there, then you got to care about it. If people don't care about it, then it's not going to matter and you're winning or losing your race.
Steve, you've ran that caucus before and brought it to veto override status. It looked to me like, just from not thinking about back home, just thinking about it in the Capitol, John Deal made this his top issue, passed it out in February. It looks to me like some of the steam come out of the supporters as John stepped aside.
Well, you know, I think that's possibly true, but obviously there's a lot of out-of-state interests that are coming in that are involved in this, hiring canvassers to come in and canvass districts whenever on the union side we're using people within the district. So it's a unique dynamic, but I do think votes matter, and I think an issue like this could be problematic politically in elections. You know, I think the reason why we're at such a large majority is, one, I think people like Joe Lakin and our HRCC team, Dave Willis, Rob Nodell, Dave Hagman, whole list of people, we're just better at it. We recruit better candidates, we run better campaigns, but if you start voting the wrong way in certain districts, we'll lose those districts.
Well, let me just real quick to end the segment. Does it pass, Joe?
I think there's a chance.
Jeff?
No override.
Steve?
No.
Cool. And we'll let that take us into our first break. We'll leave you with our Missouri leading economic indicators, and we'll see you after the break.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. We'll now move on to an issue that's picked up a lot of steam since we've been on hiatus. It's some of the legislative scandals issues that have been prevalent over the last few weeks this summer. And, Sarah, we'll start with you. The culture seems to be under a lot of scrutiny. Some folks would say you should have seen it 10, 20, 30 years ago. What is your take as somebody that works in the Capitol on these issues, and what could the legislature do with this policy to make it easy for someone who's frankly being mistreated just to stand up and be accounted for, call it out?
Yes, I agree. It's nothing new. It's been going on. When people think it's worse than ever, I think it's probably the same climate. Maybe we're at a turning point. I think that I think that the committee has done a good job, with the exception of the dress code idea. I think they've done a good job. They have some good ideas. I think that Representative Engler, his best point was that they need to get control of how many interns there are in the building, who they're working for, what school. I know that Joe and I have both managed interns in that building, and there's not a sound structure there. That you have the connection with the university, and then also you don't know, when I worked for the Minority Caucus, you don't know who is where and serving what member, even within your own caucus. But I think that there has to be an independent HR or something, an independent setup that doesn't work for the speaker or the pro tem or even through the governor's office.
They'd be speaking out against at times, right? So you have to be
Correct.
independent of them?
Correct, and really at the end of the day, these electeds work for their constituents. So it's not like corporate America in that way.
Jim Mazur, you made a point earlier. Isn't this something that in newspapers, TV studios, legislature, law firms, these issues happen, and there are policies in place to stop it? It's just, how do you make it easier for people to feel comfortable speaking out?
Sure. The people who work in the Missouri General Assembly aren't intrinsically bad people. There may be a few. I won't name names here today. But
Go ahead. We're all friends here.
But just like in any other industry, whether it's the law industry or whether it's labor or even the clergy, there are bad people out there. But most of those other industries have a system set up, and they have something in place to ensure that there are consequences attached to negative actions and things that people do that they shouldn't be doing. And for too long, I think the only consequence that people in the assembly have been subject to is their reelection. If you win, go back home and win in November, come back to Jeff City, that's the only consequence you have to worry about. And beyond that, do whatever you want, and there's zero consequences for it. I think we're finally starting to see some changes to that because of more in-depth reporting, because of social media and the trail that leaves. But what's really critical and necessary, and what I think Kevin Engler and others have gone, and Speaker Richardson have gone some distance towards, is really trying to figure out a way that you institutionalize some consequences, some real concrete penalties for people who break these rules. And if they do that, then they're going to be able to really make headway on this issue and solve this problem, because it's a sexy thing for newspapers to write about, but I think it's something that probably most of these legislators do care about as well. They think that young people should be able to come into this building, learn something, come away with a good experience, and not have it just be something where they get tortured while they're there.
See, don't you think part of this is the technology of text messaging has made these scandals easier to verify and made them something you can put some validity to? It's not just what somebody said. Do you think that technology alone has made this a bigger issue and more higher profile?
Well, I think it's made it more salacious that you actually get to see
Sure.
the exchanges, and I think, you know, the papers like to report it, and I think the editorial pages are certainly no friends of the Republican agenda, and so I think this is an issue that they're taking advantage of. But at the end of the day, I think the Speaker, Speaker Richardson, wants to improve the public trust in what they do up there, and I think they're going to be able to do that. I think Representative Engler is the perfect guy to do it, but I actually would like to see them make their changes and move on, because I want to see them focused on putting people to work, reducing crime in St. Louis, improving our public schools around the state. That's what I actually want our General Assembly focused on, and so I hope they can get past this.
So you look at this, Todd Richardson becomes Speaker quickly, probably not the way he planned. Probably had a lot of things on his agenda, and now he gets to deal with this. It looks to me like you see something where you have a serious leader coming into an office trying to fix a problem he sees as real in a mix of a bunch of people that are trying to score political points and make it a circus. The editorial boards don't like policies Republicans do. They just don't. And it seems like a throw the bums mentality. And if you throw bums out of Jeff City, you're going to throw 2 Republicans out for every Democrat. Look at the thing with the dress code, how that became an issue. That was people offering ideas in a brainstorming. Is this policy at the end of the day just going to be something they can do to move forward? And will any of the people that are his biggest critics give him any credit?
You know, no, I don't think you get credit in a situation like this, but I don't think Todd is looking for credit. I mean, I think Todd, you know, his first action as Speaker was to create this task force. It's been very serious, measured, reasoned. You know, Kevin Engler was the perfect person to put in charge of this. You know, you saw this week the suggestion of an intern dress code. Speaker Richardson stepped up immediately and proved to be the adult in the room and said, you know, this isn't about blaming interns. It's not about the clothes they wear. This is about making sure we have a good policy. And, you know, the nature of creating policies is that they can be challenging. You're trying to create a system in place that can handle all different scenarios, and it's a challenge. So he's been working on that, you know, doing it the right way, being an adult about it. And so, you know, I'm like Steve. I look forward to Todd getting through this and moving forward and start laying out his agenda for next session.
All right, let's do a few quick takes. Jeff, the legislature, one of Tom Dempsey's last acts as pro tem, was to form the Sanctity of Life Committee. And Senator Schaefer and Senator Schmidt have taken the bull by the horns and now seem to have found a link to the university publicly funded hospital in Columbia with the Planned Parenthood Clinic. What's your take on this, and what are the political implications of it?
I'm trying to figure out how it's really an issue. From at this point in time, what I see is some actors, Planned Parenthood, the University of Missouri, and others, doing things that are legal, around which there are laws that are written, in which there's really, at this point, been no credible allegation that any of those laws have been broken or any of those regulations haven't been followed. But they're engaged in doing something that some politicians don't like, and so those politicians are now engaged in trying to shame them into stop doing those things, even though they're not illegal, even though they're not wrong, even though they're not running afoul of any laws. And so I don't really understand how it's a scandal or an issue. It just seems to me, if you'll excuse the phrase, like a little bit of a fetus measuring contest between people who are engaged in an attorney general primary.
Steve Tilley, this did start from a pretty damning video of Planned Parenthood,
Sure.
pretty cavalierly talking about something that makes most people cringe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Senator Schmidt and Senator Schaefer are just a reflection of their constituents and citizens across the state that are concerned with the connection. And I think there should be answers. And I certainly welcome their being willing to step up and challenging Planned Parenthood and the university to find out the facts. I think that's what people want to hear. You know, I think is, you know, when you get into the discussion of life, I mean, it's a very heartfelt discussion. Sure. And I think we just need to do everything we can to create a barrier to where someone feels like that their tax dollars doesn't go to fund something they feel like is morally wrong.
Sarah, quickly, does University of Missouri change their policies? Do they dissociate from Planned Parenthood?
No, and I don't believe that an association is the right term. I think that they gave a physician in good standing in Missouri privileges that they would give any physician in Missouri. And I don't think it was necessarily about Planned Parenthood. And I think that they're not doing anything wrong, and they'll stay the course.
Joe, quickly, does the university separate from Planned Parenthood?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, I think Jeff Jeff seems sure there is no wrongdoing, but I think the Nixon administration has proven time and time again they're the least forthcoming administration we probably ever had. So, I think it'll be determined based on the facts that Senator Schaefer pursues here.
So the question is, are you saying, what did the governor know? When did he know it?
No, you're saying that.
Moving on to the pro Tibbs race, with Senator Dempsey leaving, there's the race between Senator Romine and Senator Richard. Who wins?
Yeah, our firm has done work for Senator Romine in the past, plan to help him in his reelection in 2016. I think we've seen really since, with the exception of Tom Dempsey, since probably 2008, there hasn't been a sure thing leadership election over there. I mean, they've been literally coin flips. They've been by 1 vote, 2 votes. So I think you look for this one to be very close again.
Jeff Mazur, what do you think?
I think that I think this race turns out the same way everybody else in their heart probably thinks it turns out, and I think that Senator Richard is the next pro tem. I think that, I don't know everybody's motivations for what they do in the building. I think sometimes people run in leadership races for reasons that have nothing to do with actually winning the race, and those rationales are opaque sometimes, and I think that's kind of what we have here.
Steve Tilley, you've got to observe this from the other end of the Capitol. How does this one turn out?
Leadership races in the Senate are different than they are in the House. I think they're more predictable in the House than they are in the Senate. I would handicap it that I think Senator Richard is a slight favorite, but I think Joe is correct. It will be very, very close and could go either way.
What do you think?
I think Joe is right that we could have another coin toss. I think that in the Senate, everyone's sort of free agent, so it is a little different.
Sure.
And I also think that, there's so much inside baseball with it. Who knows who wants and that.
All through in there, I think Senator Schaaf's email is being taken very seriously about making the Senate more like a Senate. And I think that's going to make a long, hot into the summer. But moving on to the presidential race. 2 quick takes. Who is the Republican that comes out? And does Hillary Clinton, does she have a problem?
I think it's too far to tell. They're going to have something on Hillary. I mean, they're going to bash her for something,
Sure.
whether it's Benghazi or the private phone use. Jeb, will be the.
So Trump flames out.
He does.
Steve Tilley,
was
does
fun for a
Trump
while.
flame out?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does, but I actually kind of like to have a politician that comes in, says what he thinks, and doesn't care what anybody else thinks. I think that's kind of a nice thing. I think we've learned in the last 3 or 4 months what we figured out 8 years ago, that Hillary Clinton is no Bill Clinton. She's just not a good candidate. And when you look at how she answered the Ed Henry question, I mean, it was embarrassing for her. So on the Republican side, I actually like Marco Rubio. I think he's a young guy, very articulate, former Speaker of Florida with a vision for the future. I think he does better with minorities than most Republicans would do. And I think that you'll see the cream rise to the top, and I think he'll get there.
In that case, isn't Trump a good thing? Because, I mean, the 20 million people that watched that would not have watched that debate to see Marco Rubio do well without Trump on it.
I love having Trump in. I mean, the guy is self-made. He's not out there raising money. He doesn't answer to anybody but himself. And so I actually like having him in the process. And I agree with some of what he says. And some I think is crazy. But I think it's good to have him in there. But I think at the end of the day, you'll see that Marco Rubio will rise to the top.
Jeff Mazur, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's in post-Citizens United world, it's super PAC cash that matters most. Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz have it. Those are the guys that are going to go wire to wire, or down to the wire, I think, in determining who comes out on the Republican side.
Is Hillary Clinton likable enough to be president of the United States?
Yes, she can win.
She can. Joe Lagan, what do you think?
First, I'd like to say, having worked for Steve, I think he was plenty candid while he was Speaker of the House, having cleaned up some of his messes. But, I think if you look at this, I think really, the sort of non-establishment outsider candidates, whether it's Trump, whether it's Cruz, whether it's Ben Carson and others, have really occupied a lot of this space. I believe probably well north of 50%.
I know you're in it for Rand, but who do you like?
We're with Rand, and I think you're going to see a situation when Trump comes back down to earth. It's going to be a matter of who breaks out of that pack. And to answer your second question, Hillary's got a real problem.
And we'll have to leave it right there with Hillary's real problem. We'll see you again this time next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.